Hello, everybody. Before we start tonight, we're going to have an announcement from Steve Miller of the Sierra Club. Steve?
Thank you very much. Thanks.
On your table tonight, you have something looking like this. This is a very important petition. Everybody here had electric bill increased 20% this year. You've got a little subsidy delaying it, but you're still paying 20% more. And next year, it'll be another 20% increase. And the big cause is because of the use of fossil fuel and PJM driving up the price of electricity. So this is a vitally needed petition to get the governor and the legislators, just a few, two or three, who still, Governor Murphy and two or three legislators need to come to agreement. And when they do, we hope it will be during lame duck very soon. This will get it over the hurdle and get it approved. They may need just your vote. Maybe that's all they require. We now have 349 people who signed this petition. Our goal is 384. I hope you're one of those few that make it go over the hurdle. So we need your help. And the way you do this is you scan that QR code, and that'll take you to a sign-on petition, and that urges those elected leaders to enact this really critically needed bill for 100% clean electricity by 2035. Because clean energy, like generated by solar and by backup batteries, will lower our electric bills. It'll eliminate our current dependence on expensive electricity from fossil fuel out-of-state suppliers, and will actually have well-paying New Jersey union labor that will install those clean, reliable energy sources of electricity. So all those are reasons that we think the legislatures will approve it, and Governor Murphy will sign, hopefully in lame duck. So please scan, fill out the petition, and it'll automatically send it in to get your vote in. Thank you.
Thanks, Steve. You're welcome to take a last call for food now if you'd like. Welcome back, everybody who's returning, and welcome to any first-timers here. And before we start, just FYI, the League of Women Voters has provided some information for you, including if you need any voter registration, voting information. It's at the back table by the Sierra Club banner there. And tonight, we have as our speaker Clint Andrews, who is Distinguished Professor at Rutgers, Director of its Center for Urban Policy Research, and Associate Dean for Research at the Edward J. Blaustein School of Planning and Public Policy. He is on the faculty of Rutgers' Built Environment and Green Building Group, formerly the Center for Green Building, and has been involved with its New Jersey Green Building Manual that can be found online. The manual covers design, building, operation, and evaluation of new and existing commercial buildings and of new and existing residential buildings. Anybody building a new house or doing home renovation can consult the online manual for helpful guidelines. I hope you'll all take a look at that. Clint Andrews is good at asking the right questions, using innovative approaches to answer them, and disseminating findings so they can be used by the public, by businesses, and by governments. And the New Jersey Green Building Manual is one good example of that dissemination. His most well-known area of specialty is in the built environment, and he's known for a career of showing how our built environment can be sustainable while adhering to principles of good design, agreeable for the real-world human occupants. He is the rare bird whose work can cut across disciplines and integrate them with practical consequences. He can incorporate social sciences, engineering, that has a background in both urban planning and engineering, as a licensed professional engineer. Educated at Brown and MIT in engineering and planning, Rutgers snagged him from Princeton in 1997, and he's been there on the faculty ever since. He's a past president of the Institute for Electrical Engineering and Electronics and its Society on Social Implications of Technology, and he has continued to contribute to the social implications of technology and recently received IEEE's Robert Noberini Distinguished Contributions to Power Engineering Professionalism Award from its Power and Energy Society. And he has received the IEEE's Third Millennium Medal. He has edited the scholarly Journal of Planning, Education, and Research, and is on the board of the Journal of Industrial Ecology, and is a fellow of the American Association for the Advancement of Science. In brief, his papers have looked at everything from how to best measure over time the fine particulate matter, or PM2, in the air in a residential green building, a very important endeavor because PM 2.5 is a particle that gets into our bloodstream, our lungs, our brains, and so it's a very important thing to keep out of the built environment, and even more challenging with wildfires in the area. He's done papers on how to design green buildings using an approach called agent-based modeling, and has projects on the clean energy transition, low-income housing, urban heat stress, and coastal hazards. The Environmental Protection Agency has found that the average American only spends 7% of their life outdoors. 87% is spent indoors, and another 6% in automobiles. With conditions like this, it's no wonder that the British environmentalist and sustainable development advocate, Sir Jonathan Porritt, has said, humanity's greatest priority is to reintegrate with the natural world. We have Professor Clint Andrews and his work to aid us in that reintegration and for our built environment, and we welcome him tonight for our Science Mondays lecture series. Thank you,
Thanks
Professor
so much.
Andrews.
I appreciate the introduction, and I'd like to meet that guy that you were describing. At least some of it's familiar. But what I really want to spend time with you on tonight is getting ready for next week when we have a gubernatorial election. And so I want to talk about the public policy dimensions of climate change a little bit, and take you through some of my thinking about what I'm calling a fragmented policy context, which means the local government is going in this direction, state government is going in that direction, the federal government is going in a third direction, and we are trying to do the right thing through all of that. And I'm going to center it on experiences in New Jersey, but New Jersey in the context of the whole United States. And so I'm starting off very close to here, looking out from my area in Highlands towards Seabright, where you can see just how close to nature we are able to make ourselves. And we can put water to the left of us, and we can put water to the right of us, and we can hope that a storm's not going to come along. We can hope that there's no sea level rise. We can hope that the full moon isn't going to bring a king tide. Or we can try to be a little more realistic. And so sometimes I feel like we're all thrashing around and haven't thought clearly about climate change and what it means for our daily lives. And so I've, I'm one among many, have fashioned a little bit of a framework to help me think this through. And I want to offer a natural hazard management framework that sort of says, okay, there are human creations, the things we build. There are natural phenomena. Storms come along, tides do rise. They result in natural hazards. It takes the human creation plus the natural phenomenon to get the natural hazard. And then we notice and realize something's wrong and do one of two major things. One is, and this is what humans are especially good at, we adapt. We deal with the crisis that just happened. We learn from it, and we do things differently next time. We adapt to change. The other thing that we may do, sometimes we're successful at this, is we try to mitigate the problem. We try to change the types of human creations that we put out there in harm's way. We try to reduce the pressures that yield natural hazards. And that's a lot harder to do when we're not as good at it. And so I'm going to use this framework as a way to bring a couple of what I think are salient points forward to you. So, like any framework, it's useful up to the point where it isn't useful. And where you might guess is this is a useful framework when you like the scientific method, when you trust engineering judgment, when you like to think carefully about the future. It's not a good framework when you are viewing everything through a lens of pure power politics and who's winning the fight, that kind of thing. Okay, so just I'm going to do this very quickly because I think you all know this stuff. Temperatures are rising. We've seen over the last century in New Jersey, 3 degrees Fahrenheit increase in average annual temperatures. Sea levels are rising. At Atlantic City, we've seen over the last century 1 1/3 feet increase in relative sea level based on the tide gauges. Both of these are illustrative of national trends. We've seen that precipitation is increasing, although there's quite a bit of variation. In New Jersey over the last century, we've seen 2 3/4 inches additional precipitation annually. When we look at other types of climate change, looking further afield, we've seen a decrease in Arctic sea ice. We've seen a decrease in global ocean surface acidity. We've seen more named storms in recent years, so more intense storms. And so we are seeing the natural phenomena, and we don't like the direction they're taking us. Okay, what are some of the human drivers of all this? Again, we know this. We know that there's been population growth over the centuries. The big chart here shows the U.S. population. I'm sorry, the small graph is the U.S. population. The larger graph is global population, and the famous hockey stick-shaped curve, exponential growth in population. Exponential growth in agricultural land use, dramatic industrialization, dramatic increases in the level of fossil fuel extraction. And all of that has delivered economic growth, exponential economic growth, yielding a higher standard of living. And we know that a lot of the observed warming is driven by emissions from the human activities that have given us our way of life. Our way of life has changed from hunter-gatherer to agricultural to industrial to service, and each has benefited from having access to cheap commercial energy. Here in New Jersey, we've also been busily putting stuff in harm's way. And so the background chart goes back to the year 1800, when there were only a couple of 100,000 people living in the state of New Jersey. Today we're up to above 9 million. And there are a few milestones that are especially relevant, here at the shore. 1803, the New Brunswick and Trenton Turnpike, which became US Route 1, was completed. By 1854, we had our first railroad to the shore. It went to Atlantic City. 1951, we completed the New Jersey Turnpike. Just a couple of years later, 1955, the Garden State Parkway really opened up the shore. And through all of this, we saw the dramatic suburban expansion. We saw the housing follow the highways out, heading southward from here. And we have populated our coast. Now, again, we're familiar with what happens, and that is the natural hazards. There's extreme heat. We had a hot summer last summer. If you get me started, I'll talk about this all night, but I want to keep going, and so I want to move to some of our other natural hazards. The deadly storms in New Jersey, when people have died: Irene, Sandy, Faye, Ida, Lee, Idalia. We can go on and on. And this is not new. Although the acceleration of deadly storms is new. It used to be that we'd get storms, and because people weren't living here, it didn't matter. We're experiencing flooding associated with storm surges. Most of us here remember, Sandy from 2012. Many of us are also quite familiar with tidal flooding, sunny day flooding, which has been increasing at an increasing rate. Here's some evidence from Atlantic City. We've seen riverine flooding. Manville and Raritan got pasted in recent years and really lost a lot of people and a lot of property. And so these hazards are real. And so how are we going to deal with this? What have we done to date? What are we going to do? And this is a point where I need to go back to basics. And I apologize if this feels a little bit like a civics lesson. I've been teaching long enough that I've discovered that even a first-year grad student needs to be reminded about that there's a judicial branch, and there's a legislative branch, and there's an executive branch of government. And we also need to be reminded that most of our decision-making doesn't happen through government. It happens in the marketplace, and especially things that are relevant to sea level rise, to climate change. It's our real estate markets, it's our insurance markets, it's our mortgage markets. And so many important decisions are made privately, and that's appropriate. We do realize that we need government to ensure that markets work correctly. And so we have environmental regulation. We have tax policy, innovation policy. We build infrastructure. We do land use planning. And each of these involves different levels of government and branches. And then all of this is rooted in the sort of the cultural context. And this has been a big part of, you might call it the Trump revolution, is that there's an explicit push to say we're not just trying to do public policy, we're trying to change culture. And of course they're running into resistance because the brand of culture that's being offered isn't necessarily one that people want to accept. But in terms of influence on climate change, for example, there's some very important things that are well established in US culture. The car culture, our housing choices, the way we decide to use energy, the way we decide to eat. All of these things link to climate change and represent decisions we could be making as individuals or more broadly. Okay. my version of the civics lesson, we really do have these three branches. Sometimes it feels, especially at the moment, like one branch is trying to take over the others or render the others less relevant. But this type of structure is something you see all around the world in different flavors. And the special version that we have here is multi-level government. We have federalism. We, the citizens, have allocated some of our sovereignty to our state, which has a constitution, and the state in turn creates local governments. Localities are creatures of the state, and they can be created and abolished by the state. We reserve other parts, another portion of our sovereignty to the federal level and the US Constitution, and there is a primacy clause that says that state governments have to live within what the federal parameters set. And importantly, international governance, we have the United Nations just up the road here, is really a creature of the national governments and has been struggling to establish legitimacy of its own. And it, in a sense, is a creature of the national governments. So the turkeys in the pictures, I was trying to get a turkey picture for every president. This is at Thanksgiving, next month, when the president pardons a turkey and it doesn't go to it doesn't get eaten. This helps me keep some perspective on our political institutions. Okay, when you look at the federal government, you quickly realize, if you're interested in climate change and environmental topics generally, well, some of it is hidden inside the Environmental Protection Agency, way down there in that big cluster of independent establishments. Some of it's over at the National Science Foundation, some of it's at the Tennessee Valley Authority, some of it's the Department of Interior, some of it's at the Department of Commerce, for example, the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration. Some of it's at the Department of Energy, Department of State, Department of Transportation, our Council on Environmental Quality, our Office of Science and Technology Policy, and shoot, then we've got Congress and we've got the courts. So in the United States, we have figured out how to put environment everywhere, which is a little bit like having it nowhere. Okay, enough on institutions. Let's talk about processes for a second. And here I want to really just make two simple points. The first is that Congress doesn't just take up issues because they're clearly important. First, someone has to make it important, and issues have to climb the systemic agenda. You've got to get people talking like we're doing tonight. Eventually, the New York Times is going to cover it, or a blogger is going to figure out how to summarize climate change in a TikTok video. And from there, you might get a congressional committee hearing going. You might get a state legislature to do something. And eventually, legislation will get passed, and you'll see public policy getting made. That messy process is different than what we would like to think policymaking is about, and where there's a process of formulating the public policy and then legitimating it with a vote of the appropriate body, and then implementing it, and then learning from our mistakes, because we probably got something wrong, and then terminating or changing the policy, and that there should be a true policy life cycle. That's what we tell the students they ought to do, and then we immediately say, but that's not how the real world works all the time. All right, Now, when we think about environmental issues in particular, I find it useful to think about, you might call it the value chain, where we humans extract raw materials from the earth, we do processing and fabrication, eventually we consume the product or service that was made from those materials, and then if we have things set up well, we can recycle portions of it, and then eventually something is going to end up in the environment, and there's going to be some environmental damage. And so all along this life cycle, there's points where we can intervene and create public policies. We can do severance taxes on the oil as it emerges from the ground. We can do process specifications that say whether you're allowed to use toxic materials in commercially available products. We can do product design so that we can make the air conditioner more energy efficient. We can provide guidance to consumers, Energy Star labels that make it easier to figure out, well, which is the energy efficient one of these choices. And we can go on and think about recycling subsidies or taxes and ambient quality standards and so forth. And so the point is that there's lots of opportunities to make policies, and it's worth arguing about which ways to do it are more effective, less costly, fairer, and those are arguments worth having. Okay, I mentioned that one of the interesting parts about the US context, and certainly we're not unique, roughly 40, I sort of figured it out, roughly 40% of the world's population lives under federal systems of government. So it's not just us, Canada, Brazil, Germany, to name a few. And anyway, you know, what we have learned is, first of all, this is an ancient debate. You know, if you go back and read the Federalist Papers and the pseudonyms that different famous founding fathers were using, you know, Cato was arguing for more states' rights, and Publius was arguing for more that more sovereignty should go to the national level of government. Those debates persist, although they've become a little bit like tropes. They've become ways to argue for your current position rather than because you deeply believe in one or the other. It was sort of a useful analogy was, and many people thought, okay, you could sort of do the fiscal federalism approach and allocate responsibilities to the appropriate level of government to solve things. And in fact, there is a nice logic there, you know, if you want to pool risks, you want that to go to the national government because they can cover the whole country and reduce the cost of insuring everybody. If you want to tailor your policies to local circumstances, you want to push things down to as local a level as possible. So we see in New Jersey, you know, a lot of home rule around land use policies, you know, school boards, of course, that kind of thing. And all of that would suggest a model of federalism as being kind of like a layer cake. This set of responsibilities here, that set of responsibilities there. And what some creative political scientists recognized was that's not how real federal systems work. Instead, they offered up the marble cake federalism model, which is that things just get stuck someplace because that's what was able to get passed this year. And over time, a messy marble cake accrues that puts responsibilities in unexpected places. Every so often, we might try to sort things out again. But we're always living with something that looks more like a marble cake. Okay, now there's some interesting political dynamics that come out of that. And some colleagues who were studying a question up in New York State of how come the state of New York was able to create the Adirondack Park. Has anybody been up to Lake Placid or one of those places? You know, beautiful Adirondack Mountains. How come there isn't a Catskill Park that has the same level of governance? How come the Tug Hill Plateau, which is also a beautiful place, doesn't have this? And what they noticed was that the creation of something like the Adirondack Park depended on weak local opposition and strong higher level support. And they managed to get that in place over the objections of the locals. And in that case, it was a sort of an upstate, downstate tension, because the higher levels of government in New York State are often controlled by the people in New York City and in Westchester. And they had much more a very clear kind of conservationist vision, you know, stewardship of this land forever. And in recent decades, they've been playing with that, partly because governors have found that local opposition has increased, and they need to find ways to keep people happy. But this shows how you might end up with that marble cake federalism, depending on where the support is and where the opposition is. Okay, another fun and annoying thing about federalism is that we can be inconsistent. And we can be inconsistent at every level. And so here is the, in yellow, is the price for solar photovoltaic panels like I have on my roof at my house. And it's dropped dramatically. This is just over, this is from 2010 to 2020. If you continue it on to 2025, you'll see the price has continued to drop up until about 6 months ago. And so this was driven in part by an industry that was encouraged to grow. And we had, in 2005, creation of an investment tax credit. It was extended in 2007, again in 2008, again in 2015. Then in 2017, we had a setback, and tariffs were imposed. In 2018, further tariffs. By 2022, the investment tax credit was further extended and raised. And then this year, it went in the opposite direction in the One Big Beautiful Bill to reduce the investment tax credit pretty much down to zero in a few years, and to impose higher tariffs on imported solar panels. And so, today, compared to the price per watt in January, prices have started going back up. About it's roughly 10% for residential applications. Okay, and so what we've seen is, depending on who's in the White House and who controls Congress, sometimes we like solar, sometimes we hate solar. Meanwhile, at the state level, we see a patchwork. 28 US states have a renewable portfolio standard. 11 states have a clean energy standard. Some have both. some have none. In preparing this talk, I went and got the most recent of these maps, and I noticed that compared to one a year ago, Texas has disappeared. They used to have a renewable portfolio standard, and now it's gone. And so we see some states going in one direction, other states going in a different direction. Okay, so coming back to our natural hazard framework, I want to assert, and then I'm going to show you some evidence looking at what's been going on in New Jersey and elsewhere. I want to assert that we will adapt to climate change because we adapt to anything. And the only question is, are we going to do this gracefully? Are we going to still like each other at the end? And then I want to assert that we might mitigate the drivers of climate change. It's an open question. Only some of us are trying. Some of us are actively working against it. And if we do mitigate these drivers, can we do it affordably? Because when you think of something like commercial energy, it's been so important for giving us a great quality of life. We will not want to give up much of that quality of life in return for cleaning things up. And so can we do it affordably? And then my final assertion at this point is that we ought to manage these as intertwined problems. We ought to be integrating and thinking about the trade-offs that are associated with each of our adaptation decisions and mitigation decisions. So let's do a very quick tour of adaptation, just to remind us. Some of you have lived through a lot of this. You don't need to worry about seeing the details in the back. I'll give this to the organizers. This is all based on a couple of things I've written, and hopefully the organizers can scan them for you and share them out. They're also available on our website. But you can trace New Jersey's climate adaptation efforts, especially in the coastal zone, back to the year 1914. We created the Waterfront Development Act, and it was the first effort to regulate and control development along the waterfront areas. It wasn't until much later, that into the 1960s, that we started to see federal movement, and really the first came in the form of flood insurance rate maps in 1968 to try to shape the real estate markets in the coastal zone and other risky places. And then in 1973, we started to see New Jersey step up with things like the Coastal Area Facility Review Act, CAFRA, which lawyers are very glad of because it's provided them a lot of business in trying to ensure that developments along the shore were sort of out of harm's way. And then I consider another important milestone, I'm not going to read all of these, but another important one came in 1995 when we passed and funded Blue Acres within New Jersey, which started to provide ways to buy out flood-prone properties. Okay, continuing along with adaptation, this is 2000 up to the present, and here I want to just highlight a couple of things. One that many of us remember was Superstorm Sandy, which devastated large portions of Monmouth and Ocean and Atlantic and Cape May counties, and led to some policy responses. A second thing I'll call out here was a realization that the way we were doing national flood insurance wasn't working. And so there were efforts to rewrite the legislation, which at the national level, which sort of, I won't say went nowhere, but didn't go where they intended. They were trying to do things like make the National Flood Insurance Program actuarially sound so that you'd be able to have enough premiums coming in to pay for the claims that were going out each year. And that basically has not been true since Hurricane Katrina, when that devastated New Orleans. Ever since then, Congress has been having to shovel some money in the direction of the flood insurance program. And then New Jersey has been doing a lot of executive orders all through time here. But there's one important thing that I want to call out, which I think you've become aware of, especially if you've bought property in the coastal zone recently, and that is the flood disclosure law that now requires sellers of property to list on the disclosure form, yes, this property was flooded once, it was flooded during Sandy, or it was flooded during Irene, or it's never been flooded, to basically make it easier for property buyers to find out whether they're buying into a risky location. Okay, there's lots of more policies that have all been sort of helping the adaptation process. And through all of these, we've seen some trade-offs emerging. We've designed policies that are inefficient, and there are probably more efficient ways to do them. We've designed policies that are unfair. There's probably fairer ways to accomplish this. We've created policies that have not enhanced stability, macroeconomic stability or social stability, but instead have worked against that. And so as we think about trying to improve our public policies, we want to work through these trade-offs and try to get to be more efficient, more fair, and more stable. Okay, now when we move to the mitigation part of the story, which is, if you remember, that's the part where I know we can adapt. Humans are great at adapting. I'm not sure we can mitigate. Let's find out. I suspect that there are going to be additional trade-offs. And they're probably going to come around how do you create energy that is clean and affordable and reliable? Can you do all three at once? And this takes me back to one of the very first things I ever wrote. This came out in Technology Review decades ago. And I like it because they gave us the cover and they commissioned this cover art, which the title of the article was Electricity Without Global Warming. So this is 1992. This is 30-odd years ago. And if you look at just the right-hand side of the picture, it looks like a horse race. Who's going to win? Is solar going to win? How about nuclear? Nuclear's coming on fast. Where's natural gas in this mix? What about biomass? But then if you look at the left-hand side of the picture, which in fact was sort of wrapped around the cover, you realize, oh, all these horses are connected to the same cart. And we all need to pull together. And that is sort of suggestive of this idea that we need a balanced transition. We need all of the above harnessed to these objectives of cleaner, cheaper, more reliable. So it's nuclear, geothermal, wind, solar, energy conservation, and biomass.
Does it say conserve energy on the left?
Yes.
I don't hear that much.
I'm glad you raised that. I'll show you a picture in a minute about that. Okay, here's the U.S. picture going back to the founding of our country. The green was renewables, mostly wood back then in 1776. Coal came on strong especially in the latter half of the 19th century. Soon thereafter, we discovered petroleum and figured out how to get it out of the ground, and that became dominant and it remains dominant. Natural gas came on at about the same time and rose up and has become the second most important of our energy sources. Coal was king only briefly for the first half of the 20th century, and although we still use some coal nationally, it's far less important than natural gas or petroleum. Renewables have, before I get to renewables, nuclear came on strong in the 1950s, but kind of peaked because we stopped building those power plants. And renewables is the story that we hear about the most. It changed from being wood and then hydro to now we're relying quite a bit on wind and solar. Although as a fraction, it's still, it's still a modest amount of our total energy consumption.
Is this just electricity generation or all use? What is this?
This is all uses of energy in the United States.
But energy, so wood isn't, you're not counting wood for construction and whatnot?
No. Yeah, that's why petroleum is so high. Yeah. Okay, and so one of the important things that's going on here is that there has been a series of technological revolutions that have accompanied these changes in market share for different fuel types. And I'll just rattle off some of them. We invented the electricity industry. 1882, Pearl Street Station down in the financial district in New York City. That was the first power plant. By 1927, we'd created the PJM interconnection, the Pennsylvania, Jersey, Maryland interconnection that linked together power plants over a region and allowed them to operate as a system much more reliably and cheaply. By 1950, we'd started building nuclear power plants. By 1960, we had our first gas turbine combined cycle, natural gas-fired power plant. By 1990, wind and solar were commercially available. By 1991, the first offshore wind farm was built in Denmark. It wasn't until 2016 that the first offshore wind farm in the United States was built, and that was just off Block Island. I'm a Rhode Islander originally, and so it was fun for me to go out in my brother's boat, and we went slaloming around the wind turbines and saw the fishermen enjoying their catch there. And then what's been happening very recently, and has been in the news a lot associated with the AI boom, is building lots of data centers. And they are now a measurable fraction of total energy demand and are expected to grow. Although there's a question, if the AI bubble pops, maybe the data center demand bubble would also pop. Open question. But all of these technologies have played out in the New Jersey context like this. So coal is at the bottom, the dark blue. Then natural gas has become a really important and stable portion of our mix. Petroleum, because of transportation, is still the dominant portion. Nuclear has been for decades now. This is going from 1960 up to the present. Nuclear in red, and then renewables in green are a skinny band at the top that's becoming more visible over time. Now there's a dotted line off on the left, and that represents how we were seeing serious year upon year increases in the demand for energy in New Jersey. Up until the 1970s, when, what happened in the 1970s? Yeah, energy crises. The OPEC oil cartel established a pricing regime. The Iranian Revolution in 1979 accelerated that. And we started to invest in energy efficiency. And basically, the dotted line shows where our energy consumption would be if we hadn't been investing in energy efficiency over recent decades. And you can see it is basically on track to have been our most important energy resource. You know, right up there, same magnitude as the oil that we've consumed and the natural gas that we've consumed. And so that's a part of the story that's important and not everybody remembers to tell. Okay, looking at the mitigation timelines. New Jersey actually played an important role early on, 1954, creating the New Jersey Air Pollution Act. It wasn't until 1970 that we followed up with a U.S. Clean Air Act, and so New Jersey influencing the federal level. Soon we also had the U.S. Air Pollution Control Act, Clean Air Act, and by 1978, the U.S. Public Utilities Regulatory Policies Act, which started to deregulate the electric power sector and encourage some dramatic technological changes. From 1987 to 2007, you know, more milestones. At the U.S. level, we had the very important Energy Policy Act of 1992 that established emissions trading for sulfur dioxide that started to encourage much more competition in the electric power industry. By 1999, New Jersey had its version of that called the EDICA Act, Electric Discount and Energy Competition Act, that restructured New Jersey's electric power sector. And another milestone I'll mention, 2007, an important Supreme Court case, Massachusetts versus the EPA. That was when carbon dioxide was identified as a pollutant under the Clean Air Act. And that's currently being relitigated, as you've probably seen in today's newspapers. Okay, more mitigation milestones. Within New Jersey, and in fact in the northeastern region, we invented something called the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, which allowed a way to sort of harness market forces to put a proxy price on carbon and then generated revenues that were used for environmental purposes. And that's something that is, again, that's an issue in today's governor's race. By 2015, we had the Paris Greenhouse Gas Accord, and the United States, the president commits to joining in 2015, but by 2017, the new president withdraws us from the Paris Agreement. Whiplash follows again. In 2022, we have the Inflation Reduction Act, which throws a lot of money in the direction of renewable energy, grid modernization, electric vehicles. And of course, by today, what we are seeing is that the Inflation Reduction Act has been paused. A lot of those monies have been clawed back. We've seen renewables in the United States approaching 20% of total kilowatt hours, so in the electric sector. We've seen in New Jersey that solar has achieved 5 gigawatts installed. That's a large amount. And we've seen some hesitation around something called the New Jersey Energy Master Plan, where it's something that governors are supposed to do every few years, and the 2024 update has turned into something that is waiting for the lame duck period after the gubernatorial election. It's become one of the sort of confusing points about the gubernatorial debate. Okay, now through all of this effort to mitigate climate change, to improve our energy sector, we've been doing experiments, and we've been coming up with ideas, we've been carrying out analysis, we've been implementing things, we've been deploying them. Only sometimes have we been evaluating them. But that's the direction that I'm thinking we need to do. If we admit we're doing experiments, we should be learning from the experiments. And so to wrap this up, because I really want to find out what you all are thinking, I want to assert that individual and local actions can change facts on the ground. Good ideas do bubble up. We are seeing, specifically that state and local experiments do expand our collective possibilities, and New Jersey has several times been developed model policies that have then been adopted nationally. I think there is a absolutely essential federal government role for pooling risks, for supporting basic scientific knowledge generation, and for creating national markets for solutions we might have, in the green building space or in the energy space or many others. I do think technological innovation is a key ingredient for achieving good outcomes, but I know that when we innovate, we make mistakes. And so I'm expecting unintended consequences. They are going to emerge, and we need to be ready to step up and fix the problems that our solutions generate. So I'll just close. This is a picture of the Rhode Island wind farm that I mentioned. I should have put my brother in the picture too, because he was very proud of that boat. But next week, we get to vote on this. The candidates have quite different positions in many respects on climate-related topics, and especially energy. And so I hope you're following what those positions are and have started to form opinions about that. And so with that, I'll thank you for your time, and I want to see what kinds of questions you have. Okay. And you've got a mic, so if you're willing to be the runner, I'd appreciate it.
Hi, thank you. That was a great presentation. I have a question about increased fossil fuel possibility in New Jersey, in that I'm under the impression that due to our population density, it's hard to find a place to put another generating station. And so one of the reasons New Jersey is a leader in solar, for example, is because we can't get electric. We just don't have many places to build it. But I just wanted to check that understanding. I'm not sure if that's true.
I would have a different answer than that.
I'm interested.
So there are sites that have existing power plants that can be intensified. That's one solution. That uses the existing infrastructures. There are, in some cases, equity issues associated with that. You're adding possibly an additional burden to an overburdened community. But we'll want to be careful to figure out, well, what exactly is the burden that's being added? Is it, if it's, let's say, a gas-fired power plant that is producing some nitrogen oxide pollution, which contributes to photochemical smog, contributes to ozone formation. But ozone, in fact, is a regional pollutant that spreads very widely. It's, if it was a oil-fired power plant, that would be emitting a lot of particulate matter that falls extremely locally. And so natural gas-fired power plants simply aren't as bad neighbors as some of the other types of power plants. And so it's worth looking closely at those equity arguments to make sure that it's not a performative type of opposition. The other thing I'll mention is that there is plenty of room, typically as you get off the Northeast Corridor, to locate power plants. In some places, there's adequate infrastructure. In many places, there isn't. And so then it turns to, it's not the site, it's not the footprint of the power plant that's the issue. It's how do we get the transmission line there? Or how do we get the natural gas pipeline there? And the only thing harder to site than a power plant is a transmission corridor. Because now you've got to assemble hundreds of properties, and you've got to persuade hundreds of neighbors that this is not a bad thing. And sometimes it's hard to make that case, that it's not a bad thing.
Thank you.
Hi. My question, I guess, just to follow up on the natural gas plant thing. Bill Gates had put a book out some years back where he gave his view, and his view was that politically you're not going to go anywhere by asking the American people to back down on their energy use, and therefore you have to find some way to go forward without that. And his view was that led you to nuclear as the way to go, and as you might know, he's an investor in a company that's trying to do a more cost-effective nuclear plant. His argument was against natural gas was, it looks like you're helping things because you're replacing coal, and oh, look, it's not as bad as coal, but that if you get to 2035 and you've moved some numbers down, now you've put in place all this infrastructure that doesn't fit in a zero-emission world 15 years later, right? You put in these plants, you put in these pipelines, you invested all this stuff, you're not going to pull it out. So from back to your point about the natural gas plant, in a sense, I get where you say, look, it's not as bad as coal, partly based on, the local impact. But from a climate change impact, it doesn't seem significantly better. Is that true?
Somebody who remembers their chemistry better than me will remind us how many carbon atoms are in a methane molecule? CH4? Okay. And then what is a typical hydrocarbon, a gasoline or something like that? There's more C's and fewer H's. Yeah, so that it is incrementally better, and incrementally is like 30% or something, right?
I learned it was 20%, but
okay, yeah, that order of magnitude. So there is a benefit. It would be great to move right to zero, but of course, with the nuclear fission, you've got the extraction of the uranium from somewhere and mine tailings. You've got the waste disposal, which right now each power plant has a pool next to the plant, and that's where we store it. We've got 100 odd of them scattered around the countries. From a security perspective, that's awful. Mm-hmm. We've tried creating a national repository out at Yucca Mountain in Nevada. That worked up until the point that Harry Reid became majority leader, right? And he put Yucca Mountain on hold, and it hasn't budged since. And if we turn to solar and wind, they both depend on the rare earth minerals that China is using as a weapon against the U.S. tariff policies right now, because they are cheaply mined in certain locations and not in other locations. So there are these trade-offs, throughout, sure, that are worth paying attention to. The, the part of the Gates argument that I've had trouble with is denying the value of a bridge fuel, meaning we want to do a graceful energy transition. We want to go from very carbon intensive and polluting coal, oil, to completely carbon free, completely non-polluting. But how do we get there from here? And so natural gas was identified back really in the 1980s as the bridge fuel. That's what was going to get us to shut down the old coal-fired power plants finally. And it had this special feature that you could put a gas turbine in the same footprint as an old coal-fired power plant, so you wouldn't need any new plant sites, again, because you could get lots more kilowatt hours out of that same acre or two. It did bring along with it the implication that the bridge period wasn't going to be 10 years. It was going to probably be 50 years. This was being done in the 1980s. So it's coming up on 50 years already. Gates can be worried that, okay, maybe it's really 75 years, and are we dragging our feet too much? But I'm sympathetic to this idea of preserving a fuel mix in order to ensure that we don't make energy too expensive or too unreliable. In other words, you can't just solve the environmental part of the problem. You've got to balance it against the affordability part of the problem and the security part of the problem. Who's got the mic? I guess.
I heard you talking about on a chemical molecular level the cleaner nature of natural gas, but one of the things that comes to my mind is things like tar sands and stuff like that. I think that I haven't thought about this stuff in a long time, and just eradicating these pristine environments in Canada and stuff like that, as well as the chemicals that are used in the extraction process, and pools of these chemicals evaporating into the atmosphere and the effects those have on the environment. I don't know if those evaporating pools affect climate change. I know strip mining, temperate rainforest definitely affects climate change. But I was curious about your thoughts on these factors along with natural gas, as cancer risks and stuff of that nature, from the burning of the chemical as well as from the chemicals used in the extraction process.
Yeah, that's a great point, and I definitely advocate for taking a life cycle perspective on the environmental impacts. Here we are at the end of all the pipelines, so the ones that concern us most, if we just are putting blinders on and thinking about our town or our state, are going to be the impacts of combustion on our neighborhoods, burning the fuel. But you're right, somewhere out there at the other end of the pipeline, some pretty awful environmental impacts are happening. Pennsylvania is, you don't have to go far to see the fracking revolution and how that has affected some parts of Pennsylvania. Effects on some effects on air quality, some effects on water quality, punching holes through aquifers and things like that. The Canadian tar sands, or as we're getting ready for our next war, the Venezuelan dirty oil, it's a kind of a really cruddy kind of crude oil down there, full of high sulfur and so forth. Those are in the tar sands case, you're right. The process of extracting, in that case, it's oil. Natural gas, I believe, is less centrally dependent on the tar sands and more on other sources. But extracting oil is basically you have to put much more energy and chemicals into the ground to get less energy out. And so from a life cycle perspective, it's a crazy thing to do. Its only advantage is that it's in a remote place. And as long as you don't live in that remote place, it's easy to forget about. Why don't you, yeah.
So I wanted you to discuss conservation a little bit more. I think you said something like the conservation since the 70s is the biggest source of savings of energy in New Jersey. And it strikes me, if I heard you, if that's correct, I'm not sure. But in any case, it strikes me that's because we have LEDs and we have better dishwashers and more efficient heating systems. Is there any portion of that because of humans turning their lights off? It certainly is not because they're driving slower or have more efficient vehicles. So is there anybody besides me who cares to put a surge protector to turn their television off when they're not using it?
My parents scolded me if I didn't turn the lights off when I left the room. You've raised one of the classic, it's not a debate, it's really a topic of empirical study these days. How much of the energy saving is due to efficiency improvements versus curtailment behaviors? And it turns out that it's possible to make the answer really complicated because it's so context dependent, and part of it is dependent on, well, are you paying for that energy or not? If you personally are paying for it, you'll be more likely to curtail. You'll be more likely to conserve. If you're renting and utilities are included in the rent, who cares? And then it comes down to what can a landlord do? And the landlord is going to have trouble enforcing a behavior beyond not letting you have access to your thermostat, which that's what they do at Rutgers, actually. They have the thermostat on the wall, and then they have a clear plastic box around it that's locked. So we can look at it, and we can't touch it. So in an institutional setting, you can definitely do that. And that's why so much of the progress has been due to regulations, energy efficiency standards, appliance efficiency standards, incentives to buy LED lights. And, I don't know, you probably remember how for a while they were handing out first they were handing out the compact fluorescents to replace instead of your incandescent light. And then they started handing out the LED light that still fits into the same socket as your old incandescent. So you've leapfrogged 2 generations of technology with the same socket. And that is one of the most successful energy efficiency programs that ever happened, because it was something that could be done incrementally, person by person. It can be done with mass markets because you can give the subsidy to Home Depot and let them share the cost savings with the customers that they already have. And plus, you didn't need new sockets, so you didn't need to go and rip out all the wiring in your house. And so curtailment behavior can be important, and energy efficiency standards that also affect your investment in future things has been the most reliable of all these savings.
Thank you for the wonderful presentation. I want to talk about artificial intelligence. I've understood it takes a lot of resources. Do you have any information about data we can get about these huge things that are being built that I'm hearing it even from people that don't know about the environment. They're like, every time I Google something on ChatGPT, it costs a bottle of water. So it's like, I feel very helpless when I shut off my lights and use my water bottle. When AI, I feel like these giant things. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, well, I think this is an important moment for the, I'll call it the conservation community, because we've worked hard and we've gotten lots of policies in place to make energy use more efficient and to have judicious curtailment behaviors. And then along comes this new demand for the resource that we've been trying to steward so carefully. My personal view of it is I still am glad that I have the efficient appliances, because they save me money in the long run, and they reduce my personal carbon footprint. And so I personally feel good about that. The fact that there's a new demand is sort of an economic reality. And I think it's still an open question of is the demand that's forecasted, and that's in a lot of ways that's what's been driving, like the big price hikes that came out of the PJM capacity auction this last year that has caused New Jersey's electricity prices to go up about, what, 17, 20%, somewhere in there. A lot of that is based on believing the forecasts that we're going to need that many data centers. What I've been learning from talking to computer scientists and computer engineers who work on AI day to day, and there's probably some of you in the room who can correct me if I get it wrong, is that it's important to not view AI as a single general thing that we're just going to get more of. Instead, there are subcategories that are going to have different impacts. And so the ChatGPT type of model, where you train a large language model on the whole internet, that training, consuming all of those computing cycles, can be done anywhere in the world. It doesn't need to be done in Red Bank. What needs to be done close to home are the applications that they're low latency applications, meaning that you need a quick response. So you're looking at things on your cell phone, and an example might be, what's the shortest route to get from Highlands to Lincroft at 5:30? That's what I was using it for a little while ago, right? That algorithm needed to give me my response right away. I wasn't going to wait around for it to be calculated somewhere out in Wyoming or something. And so there are some applications that are going to drive a localized demand for data centers. And there are others that could be located anywhere, presumably in places where the energy is really, really cheap and where there's adequate water. They haven't found those ideal places yet, funny enough. But, and so it's reasonable to expect new demands for a wonderful commodity like electricity to emerge. The ones that we've been cheering for are, home heat pumps, so we can get heating and cooling for our homes, electric vehicles, so that we can reduce the emissions that we experience in congested places like New Jersey, and then data centers. you know, are data centers morally inferior compared to electric vehicles or heat pumps? That's debatable. There's can be great good coming out of some of these AI tools, along with the absolute terror that many people feel, you know, associated with them. And speaking as someone who has to do grading, it's totally messed up the way I try to grade papers. I have no idea who wrote what. I've resorted to oral exams, basically. Yeah. Who's got the mic?
I have the mic. I have a question, actually.
How about hydrogen power?
So hydrogen power has, let's see, I first wrote an article about hydrogen in 20 years ago. And sort of talking about it, it's a great energy carrier. It's like electricity. You know, you don't mine hydrogen, you mine stuff that has hydrogen in it. And then you create hydrogen for use just before you burn it or use it in a fuel cell. So it has some good qualities as an energy carrier. It burns cleanly at the end. It's a little bit hard to transport because it's so light. Certainly part of the calculus of all the reinvesting in natural gas distribution pipelines that's going on right now is that some of them can be reused for hydrogen. So there are definitely some materials questions around that. Will embrittlement happen or not? Right now, there's still the basic problem, which is hydrogen is expensive to produce. You know, we get most of it by reforming natural gas. We get a little bit of it by electrolyzing water if we happen to have a nuclear power plant or something else handy. It could be part of the future mix if it becomes easier to store it for transportation purposes. And that depends on not having ever higher pressures in a canister, but having really clever chemistry that creates hydrides that can then be you can then easily strip the molecules out of them. So why don't you go ahead?
Yeah, I have an observation. I'd like to get your views of it. It's about ways of generating renewable electricity in New Jersey. We went through a big cycle of offshore wind was going to be our savior, and it didn't come out that way. And we have since put in all our marbles now on solar panels. And the wrinkle is to add in batteries, and that combination is really potent. I'm trying to understand this big picture of what New Jersey's doing, and I assume it's like there's things maybe you can add to that to make me understand it.
Sure. That's a great question. And first I would say we are, and it's not just New Jersey, every place has policy incoherence. At the same time that we're really pushing solar especially, rooftop solar, parking canopy solar, solar farms are the same Board of Public Utilities that has been designing those incentives has also encouraged the natural gas distribution companies to replace all of their old piping with new piping so that they are hedging their energy bets. And that sounds incoherent, although in a world where you care partly about the environmental impacts, partly about the affordability, and partly about the security dimensions, it makes a little more sense. I will mention one other thing which I think is really, really important and hasn't come up. I was wondering if it would be part of the questions. And that is that for all that we've been doing on things like encouraging solar, we have fallen far behind, and I think part of the blame belongs with the utility companies, and part of the blame goes with policymakers. we have fallen far behind in bringing our electric distribution systems up to date. So the wires that run down your street, the little transformer perched on the utility pole outside your house, those have all been around, you know, in some cases for a century. The old creosote-dipped trees and the old transformers full of PCBs that are still sitting up there, and all of those in a world where we have a lot of what the utility engineers called inverter-based resources, meaning solar photovoltaics that produces DC that has to go through an inverter to become AC power, and similarly battery storage that has to go through an inverter to be connected to your house. We are not, our distribution systems are having trouble handling the new types of both sources and uses of energy out in the distribution systems. And that's something that people don't talk about. That's not part of the governor's race. If you get a chance to corner a candidate, ask them, see if they even know what a distribution system is. This is what I think we're underinvesting in at the moment. That has become the barrier to getting the distributed generation sources like solar more widely adopted. That's also needed, frankly, even for things like the data centers. They are imposing loads that are beyond what the local distribution systems can handle. All right.
So just add one more question and relating to the last couple and what you said about policy options, and that could be marbled as well as non-marbled, to improve distribution by eliminating the interconnection queue backlog for renewables, requiring AI and data centers to support that for the demand they're adding to contribute to that improved supply, as well as through things like battery storage and local battery storage. And so are there options like that?
Yeah, I do think we're at this point where we're going to be trying some experiments. And one of the things that you hear quite a bit right now are jurisdictions saying, okay, if you want to build a data center, you have to build the power plant that services that data center too. And if you can do both of those, God bless you. And that approach is something, some people think that makes a lot of sense. It reduces the risk for the utilities of building a bunch of power plants that then turn out not to be needed, or if the data centers are easy to move. And so if the price of electricity goes up here, or the water supply runs out here, you just load all those servers onto some trucks and ship them somewhere else. And so it's a little bit like if you are counting on that demand to be there forever, you might be disappointed. It's a little bit like you know, how we see big box stores pop up and then disappear. And so the utility companies worry that they're going to lose revenue if they allow these new power plants to be, captive power plants to be built. But at the same time, they don't quite want to take on the risks themselves. And so there's some paralysis going on in that general area. There is plenty of room for individual initiative. You know, your rooftop solar, your energy efficiency investments. There is kind of a flowering of alternative financial mechanisms. Some make sense, some are a little sketchy. So community solar, for example, has proved to be a useful way to get solar arrays built and then figure out separately who's going to be using the energy, you know, having sort of spatial arbitrage, you might call it. some of the other experiments that have been tried and have not worked as well have been when a company, a third party, puts solar on your house and finances that solar and charges you a monthly bill. The only trouble is when you move, the value of the solar panels is not capitalized into the house. And in fact, it's viewed as, it leads to a discounting of the value of the house because there's some other encumbrance now that the buyer has to worry about. And so we are entering this kind of interesting world right now where we're trying different financial tools to achieve these clean energy objectives. Yeah, I'm not sure how long are we supposed to keep
Well, we'll take one more question.
Yeah.
And then
Thank you. Nothing's been said about something called balcony solar, which I understand is very popular in Europe and is working our way here slowly. Tell us what it is, how it's different from solar panels on your roof. What do you see about the future of it? And anything else you care to say? And then I have a follow-up question after.
You're doing a twofer, I think. So I'm not familiar with balcony solar. I've spent a fair amount of time in Europe. I have not seen it.
What's unique about it is it's basically small solar panels
Okay.
that electronically it's set up so you could plug the system right into any outlet in your house
Oh, okay.
or outside the house to provide the internal energy for your house.
Yeah.
So,
Well,
it really sounds intriguing. And
Yeah.
what I was going to ask you is this. I have a 30,000-gallon pool in my backyard, swimming pool, that over the last 40 years where I've been in my house, I've had to buy natural gas heaters for these 30,000 gallons of water to keep my wife happy. And they only last about 7 or 8 years. So they cost thousands of dollars, and they use lots and lots of natural gas. I wonder if something like a balcony solar panel, or a few of them, plugged into the wall, which could somehow be used to heat the water in the pool.
Okay, so 2 comments. Balcony solar, as I understand it from you, faces the challenge of balconies are small, and therefore the amount of solar energy you can get from a panel is going to be small and is unlikely to fully satisfy a household's energy needs. It can contribute a little bit. It's sort of like if you can get these foldable solar panels to take camping with you, and what you get out of that solar panel is not a full night of listening to your radio and having lots of lights. You get enough so that you can cook dinner before it goes dark. So that you have a sort of a constrained energy budget that you have to live within, or else just accept that it's a small contribution.
But it doesn't
On the
it
pool.
doesn't have to go on the balcony. It could just be outside where it's south-facing for maximum effect.
Yeah, sure. But you're not going to be able to put 20 panels up. You're going to be able to put one panel
It would be
up.
a small supplement. But if a lot of people did it, it could have an impact.
Yeah, so this is a point where basic physics reins us in a little bit. If you're in the New Jersey leafy suburbs where you have an acre and a house, a nice big, like a ranch house, let's say, probably you can generate far more than your annual energy requirements. If you're in an apartment building 10 stories tall and all you have is a little roof at the top and you've got 100 people living in the apartment building, even if they have balconies, you won't have enough square feet of solar to satisfy everybody's needs. So it's great for the suburbs. It's incremental in the city. On the swimming pool, you ought to be doing solar thermal and not solar electric.
We're going to have Laura Bagwell do the presentation on
Oh, great.
she's going to give a presentation on UC.
thank you, Professor Andrews.
Okay. Thank you.
And Laura? With a message from the League of Women Voters.
Yeah, I'm with the League of Women Voters. If anybody has any questions, first of all, do I need to even talk to you? Did you all vote? Yes. Did everybody vote? Very good. So if anybody has any questions, I will be at the table in the back, and this is a handy vote411.org. If anybody you know doesn't know how to vote, send them to this website. Oh, and thank you, I'm loud. But thank you so much for voting. Participating in democracy is a requirement to have a democracy. So remember it always. Thank you so much for coming. Any interest in League of Women Voters?